"Do it quickly, rancher, I won't scream," pleaded the wounded Apache girl trapped under the cannon. The sun was sinking low behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the wide, dry plains. The wind swept across the land, carrying with it the faint smell of dust, grass, and smoke. John Callahan, a rugged rancher in his 40s, was making his usual rounds near the edge of his property. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and his boots stirred up little clouds of dust as he walked. He had lived in this region all his life, and he knew every ridge, every stream, and every tree. He also knew that life on the frontier was not easy. There were dangers everywhere, wild animals, harsh weather, and sometimes men who had little regard for the law. John was checking his fences as he always did, making sure the cattle were safely grazing in the corral. The evening was quiet, almost peaceful, but something in the air felt different tonight. A distant sound reached his ears, faint but alarming, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoing over the hills. He froze, listening carefully. The sound came again, closer this time. His hand instinctively rested on the handle of the knife at his belt. Though he was used to quiet evenings, he knew the plains could hide trouble, and he had learned long ago to trust his instincts. Moving cautiously, he followed the sound toward the old fort ruins not far from his land. The fort had been abandoned for years, a relic of earlier conflicts and lawless times. The wooden walls were broken and the roof had long since caved in, leaving only the stone foundations and scattered debris. As he approached, John saw something that made his heart skip a beat. There, partially hidden under a toppled cannon, was a young girl, her face pale and streaked with blood. Her clothes were torn and one of her legs was pinned under the heavy metal. Despite her injuries, her dark eyes met his, wide and full of fear, but also something else. Determination. The girl spoke, her voice soft but urgent. "Do it quickly, rancher, I won't scream." Her words were hesitant, but she managed them with an unexpected bravery that surprised him. John glanced around. The area seemed empty, yet he knew she was not safe. Whoever had attacked her might still be nearby. Without hesitation, he moved closer. "Easy now," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "I'm going to get you out, but you have to stay calm." His voice was steady, a mix of reassurance and command. The girl nodded slightly, biting her lip to keep from crying out. He could see that she was hurting badly, and the weight of the cannon made the task seem almost impossible. Still, John was strong from years of ranch work. He gritted his teeth and began lifting inch by inch, while she adjusted herself to relieve some of the pressure. As he worked, he tried to make sense of the situation. The girl was clearly Apache, based on her dark hair, skin, and the beads woven into her braids. John knew that in these parts, tensions between settlers and native tribes could be high, but this child was clearly in no position to fight anyone. She was alone, wounded, and afraid. He thought about the stories he had heard of attacks, of families torn apart by greed, fear, and misunderstanding. He had seen enough blood in his life to know that ignoring a situation like this was not an option. Finally, with one last heave, he lifted the cannon enough for her to wriggle free. She rolled onto the ground, groaning softly. John immediately checked her injuries. Her leg was badly bruised, maybe even broken, and there were cuts on her arms and face. He tore a strip of his shirt and wrapped it around the wounds as best he could, pressing gently to stop the bleeding. "There," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're safe for now. We just need to move a little and then we'll get you help." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Despite the pain, there was a glimmer of trust forming between them. She nodded faintly, trying to speak, but only a whisper came out. "Thank you," she said. Her accent was soft, almost musical, and John could tell she had lived in this land her whole life. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they began to move away from the ruins. Every step was careful, measured, as her leg hurt with every motion. The wind picked up, blowing dust into their eyes, but John did not complain. His mind was focused entirely on keeping her safe. He scanned the horizon constantly, watching for any sign of danger. The plains could be deceiving. A hostile man could hide behind any ridge or ride across the horizon without warning. As they walked, John tried to talk to her, though he knew she might not understand him fully. "Where are you from?" he asked gently. She looked down, clenching her fists. After a moment she whispered, "Home, gone." Her voice was barely audible, and the sadness in it cut through him like a knife. She had lost her family. That thought made his jaw tighten. In all his years, he had never encountered such vulnerability and courage at the same time. He felt a mix of sorrow and responsibility. The sun dipped lower, casting long orange and purple shadows across the land. John knew they needed shelter soon. The girl's breathing was shallow, and her energy was fading. He looked around, spotting an old cave hidden behind a cluster of rocks. It was small but would provide cover for the night. Carefully, he guided her inside, laying her down on a bed of dry grass he gathered. He tended to her wounds as best he could with the limited supplies he had. Her leg needed more attention than he could give, but he fashioned a splint using a stick and some cloth. She winced but said nothing, her face showing determination to endure the pain. John admired her courage. Despite the fear and injury, she never panicked. She simply endured, trusting him to help. The night grew colder and the wind howled around the cave. John built a small fire outside, low and controlled, to keep them warm. He kept one eye on the flames and one on the dark horizon, ever watchful. He knew the plains were dangerous at night. Predators roamed, and men with ill intentions could appear without warning. But for now, the girl was safe. Around the fire, he tried to make her feel comfortable. He offered water from his canteen, and she drank slowly, trembling. He spoke softly, telling her stories of the land, of the cattle and horses he cared for, of the small town nearby. His voice was calm, steady, meant to reassure her. She listened quietly, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and curiosity. It was clear she had never met anyone like John before, someone who cared enough to risk his life for her without asking anything in return. Hours passed slowly. The stars emerged, twinkling high above the plains, and the world seemed to calm. John kept his hand on her shoulder, ensuring she remained safe, even as she drifted in and out of sleep. He knew that tomorrow would be another challenge, finding a safe settlement, getting her proper care, and ensuring she was protected from those who had harmed her. But for tonight, she was alive, and that was all that mattered. As he sat beside her, John reflected on the strange turns life could take. One moment he was tending his ranch, the next he was a protector for a child he had never met, caught in a world of conflict and danger. The girl, despite her suffering, had shown him something powerful: courage, resilience, and a will to survive. He knew this was the beginning of a journey neither of them would forget, a journey that would test their limits and forge a bond beyond words. The night passed slowly, but John remained vigilant. The girl slept fitfully, and he listened for any sound that might indicate trouble. When dawn broke, the plains were bathed in soft golden light. The wind had died down and the world seemed quiet again. John looked at the girl who was stirring, her dark eyes blinking in the morning light. She smiled faintly at him, a gesture of trust and gratitude. For John, that smile was enough. It told him that despite everything, despite the pain and fear, she had hope. And for the first time that day, he allowed himself to feel a small measure of relief. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, step by step, until they found safety and healing. And so, the rancher and the wounded Apache girl began the first part of their journey, a journey through the unforgiving plains, where courage, trust, and humanity would guide them through danger and uncertainty. The morning sun climbed slowly over the plains, casting a golden glow across the dry grass and jagged rocks. John Callahan adjusted his hat, squinting against the light, and glanced at the girl. She was awake, her dark eyes scanning their surroundings carefully, as if still wary of danger. John knew that trust had to be earned, and he was determined to keep her safe no matter what. He helped her sit up, supporting her injured leg as best he could. "Feeling a little better?" he asked gently. She nodded, though a faint wince crossed her face when she moved. John offered her some water and a small piece of bread he had carried in his satchel. She ate slowly, savoring it, and John could see that the simple act of food and care brought some relief to her weary spirit. "We need to get moving," John said. "It's not safe to stay here. There are people looking for you, and we have to find somewhere safe." The girl nodded again. She did not speak much, but her eyes communicated a determination that impressed John. He realized that despite her young age and the trauma she had endured, she possessed a strength far beyond what he expected. They began their journey carefully, moving slowly across the plains. John helped her step over rocks and around shallow gullies, keeping a watchful eye on the horizon. Every so often, she would pause to catch her breath, leaning heavily on him for support. He could feel her fear, but also her resilience. She was surviving, and she refused to give up. As they walked, John tried to make conversation even though their words were limited. "What happened to your home?" he asked softly. The girl hesitated, her lips pressed together. Finally, in a small, trembling voice, she said, "Attacked, gone." She looked down, her shoulders shaking slightly. John understood without needing more explanation. Her family and village had been destroyed. She was alone. The weight of this realization pressed heavily on him. He had encountered many hardships in his life, but seeing this young girl's suffering stirred a protective instinct he could not ignore. They followed a winding trail that led toward a cluster of trees in the distance. The trees promised shade and some cover from the sun, which was now high and merciless. John guided her carefully, keeping his eyes peeled for any signs of danger. He knew the plains were home to wild animals, but he also feared the possibility of men who might wish to capture or harm her. Every rustle of grass or snapping twig made him tense, his hand hovering near the knife at his belt. Despite the danger, the girl showed remarkable courage. She moved with care, listening to John's instructions and trying to match his pace. Occasionally, she would glance at him with a question in her eyes, as if asking, "Why are you helping me?" John would smile faintly, a small reassurance. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. That was all she needed to hear for now. By midday, they reached the edge of the trees. The shade brought some relief from the blazing sun, and John helped her settle under a large oak. He examined her leg again, making sure the splint he had fashioned the day before was holding. She nodded that it was not too painful, though he could see the strain in her face. He knew this journey would be long and difficult, but he also knew they had no other choice. Safety lay only a day's travel ahead, and there was no time to waste. As they rested, John listened to the sounds of the forest. Birds chirped from the branches, and the wind rustled through the leaves. It was a quiet, almost peaceful moment, and for a brief time, the harsh reality of the plains seemed distant. He glanced at the girl and noticed her staring at the sky. Her expression was thoughtful, distant, as if memories of her family and home flickered in her mind. John said nothing, respecting her silence. He understood that sometimes words could not heal the wounds one carried. After a short rest, they continued. The girl's steps were slow, but she refused to be carried for long. John admired her determination. She wanted to survive, and she was willing to endure pain to do it. As the afternoon passed, they encountered a small stream. The water was clear and cool, and John helped her drink and wash the blood and dust from her face. She smiled faintly, a small but meaningful gesture of gratitude. They paused at the stream, knowing they needed to plan their next move. John looked across the water to the hills beyond. Somewhere over those hills lay a settlement, a place where the girl could find help and safety. But the journey was far from over. The land between them and safety was open and unforgiving, with no guarantee of shelter or protection. John's mind weighed the risks, but he had made a promise to keep her safe, and he would not abandon her now. As they walked again, the plains seemed to stretch endlessly. The sun began to lower and the shadows grew long. They found a small rise of rocks that offered a vantage point. From there, John could see a thin column of smoke in the distance. It could be a campfire, perhaps friendly, or it could belong to those who had caused the girl harm. He decided to approach carefully, keeping the girl hidden behind the rocks. They moved quietly, step by step. The girl followed his instructions, crouching low and staying close. Her trust in him was evident now, even if she could not fully understand his words. John whispered encouragements, guiding her forward. They reached the edge of the firelight, hidden from view, and John surveyed the area. It appeared empty, but he did not relax. On the plains, appearances could be deceiving. Night began to fall, and John knew they needed shelter before darkness fully set in. He spotted a small cluster of trees with thick underbrush. It would provide cover and a place to rest. Carefully, he helped the girl toward the trees, making sure her leg did not twist or strain. Once they were under the cover, he made a small, hidden fire using dry leaves and twigs. He kept it low, just enough to provide warmth without drawing attention. The girl sat close to him, shivering from fatigue and pain. John covered her with a blanket he carried, and she rested her head against his shoulder. The fire crackled softly, and for a moment the world outside their small circle of light seemed far away. He offered her a small piece of jerky, which she ate slowly. He could see the trust in her eyes growing. She depended on him, and he would not let her down. As the night deepened, John reflected on the day's events. He thought about the bravery the girl had shown, and the suffering she had endured at such a young age. He realized that her survival depended not only on his strength but also on her courage and determination. She had faced horrors and yet continued to push forward. He admired her resilience, and he felt a growing sense of responsibility and care. The girl spoke softly, almost to herself. "I will survive," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying a strength that touched John deeply. He nodded, knowing she meant it. Survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about hope, determination, and the will to keep moving forward, no matter how hard the journey. Throughout the night, John kept watch, listening for any signs of danger. The plains could be treacherous, and he could not afford to let his guard down. The girl slept fitfully, sometimes stirring from nightmares, and he would soothe her with a gentle hand on her shoulder or a quiet word of reassurance. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, long hours of travel, possible encounters with hostile men, and the constant struggle of keeping her safe, but he felt ready. Together they had already faced much, and he trusted that their bond and determination would see them through. When the first light of dawn touched the plains, John stirred the girl gently. "It's time to move," he whispered. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the light, and nodded. Though her body ached, her spirit remained strong. She trusted him completely, and he felt a renewed sense of determination. Today, they would continue their journey toward safety, toward hope, and toward a future where she could recover and live without fear. As they left the cover of the trees and stepped back onto the open plains, John glanced at her and smiled faintly. "We'll get there," he said, more to himself than to her. She returned a small, tentative smile, a flicker of hope in her dark eyes. And so, side by side, they began the next part of their journey, a journey that would test their endurance, their courage, and the strength of their trust in each other. The wind blew across the plains, carrying dust and the faint scent of wildflowers. John adjusted his hat, keeping a watchful eye ahead. The girl followed closely, every step slow but deliberate. The sun climbed higher and the day stretched before them. Danger and hardship lay ahead, but together they would face whatever came, step by step, hand in hand, determined to survive and reach safety. The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden under the bright sun, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. John Callahan led the way, his eyes constantly scanning for danger. The girl, though still weak and in pain, walked beside him with surprising determination. Her leg throbbed with every step, but she refused to slow down for long. She had survived so much already, and she was determined to keep moving forward. John adjusted the splint on her leg, making sure it was tight enough to support her but not so tight that it cut off circulation. "We're going to take it slow," he said, his voice calm. "Every step counts." She nodded silently, understanding without needing words. Her trust in him had grown, and she knew he would protect her. The journey was not easy. They had to navigate rocky terrain, shallow streams, and patches of thorny bushes. At one point, the girl stumbled on a hidden route, and John caught her just in time. "Careful," he warned gently. She steadied herself, taking a deep breath, and pressed on. Every movement was a test of patience and endurance, but neither of them complained. They were focused on survival, and that shared purpose kept them moving. As they walked, John tried to understand more about the girl's past. "Do you have a name?" he asked softly. She looked at him, hesitated, then whispered, "Tayanita." John repeated the name quietly, letting it settle in his mind. "Tayanita," he said. "A strong name for a strong girl." She smiled faintly, the first real smile in days, and he felt a flicker of hope. The day wore on, and the sun climbed high, making the journey even more exhausting. They paused in the shade of a large rock to rest and drink from their water supply. John handed Tayanita a piece of jerky, which she ate slowly, savoring each bite. Her body was weak, but her spirit remained strong. She looked at him, and he could see gratitude in her eyes. She had been alone and terrified, and now she had someone to rely on, someone who believed in her survival. John kept a careful watch as they moved. He knew the plains were unpredictable. Wild animals roamed freely, and there was always the possibility of men with harmful intentions. Every sound, whether the rustle of grass or the distant call of a bird, made him alert. He instructed Tayanita to stay close, and she obeyed without hesitation. She trusted him completely, and that trust gave him strength. In the afternoon, they reached a shallow river. The water was clear and cold, and John helped Tayanita step in carefully. The cool water soothed her aching leg, and she let out a soft sigh of relief. They drank from the river and filled their canteens. John knew they would need every bit of energy they could find for the rest of the journey. "Stay close to me," he reminded her. "We're not safe yet." He stopped immediately, crouching behind a small bush and signaling Tayanita to do the same. Squinting, he saw two men riding horses, moving quickly across the plains. He didn't know who they were, but he knew caution was necessary. "We need to hide until they pass," he whispered. Tayanita nodded, her eyes wide with concern, and they moved quietly behind a rock formation. They waited in silence, listening to the horses' hooves pounding the earth. The men passed without noticing them, and John exhaled slowly, relieved. "That was close," he said softly. Tayanita nodded, pressing her hand against his arm briefly, a silent gesture of thanks. John felt a bond forming between them, a connection built on trust, courage, and shared experience. Nightfall approached, and they needed shelter. John spotted a small grove of trees near a hill, offering cover from the open plains. He guided Tayanita carefully, helping her over uneven ground. Once inside the grove, he gathered dry leaves and sticks to build a small fire. The warmth would provide comfort and protection, but he kept it low to avoid drawing attention. They sat close to the fire, sharing what little food they had. John looked at Tayanita, seeing both her exhaustion and her determination. "You've been very brave," he said. "I know it's hard, but we're going to get you to safety." She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, and gave a small nod. She was tired, but she would not give up. As the night grew deeper, John kept watch. Tayanita slept fitfully, occasionally shifting from nightmares, and he soothed her with gentle words and a comforting hand. He thought about the journey ahead and the dangers they would face, but he felt a growing sense of resolve. They had survived this far, and he believed they could survive the rest of the journey together. The next morning they continued their trek. John led them through a narrow canyon, where the walls provided some protection from the wind. Tayanita moved carefully, following his instructions, and he helped her navigate the tricky terrain. Along the way, he encouraged her to speak, to share her thoughts or feelings. At first she was quiet, but gradually she began to tell him small pieces of her story, the attack on her village, the loss of her family, and her determination to survive. John listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging. He understood that her words were heavy with pain, and he respected her need to speak in her own time. He offered words of comfort when appropriate, reminding her that she was not alone anymore. Together, they faced the harsh reality of the plains, relying on each other for strength and guidance. As they walked, John noticed signs of life in the distance, a small cluster of huts, perhaps a settlement or a farm. Relief flickered in his chest, but he reminded himself to remain cautious. They had to approach carefully, ensuring it was safe before revealing themselves. He guided Tay and Ida behind a ridge, allowing them to observe from a distance. The settlement appeared peaceful, with smoke rising from chimneys and people moving about their daily tasks. John let out a quiet sigh of relief. "We're almost there," he whispered. Tay and Ida's eyes brightened, and for the first time he saw a spark of hope in her expression. She had endured so much, and now safety seemed within reach. Carefully, they descended toward the settlement, keeping to the shadows. John reminded Tay and Ida to stay close and move quietly. They reached the outskirts without drawing attention and paused to rest. The girl's leg ached, and John helped her sit on a large rock. He checked the splint once more, adjusting it as needed. Finally, they approached a small farmhouse where an older couple tended to their animals. John knocked lightly on the door, and a kind-faced woman answered. John explained the situation briefly, keeping it simple, and the woman immediately offered help. They brought Tay and Ida inside, providing food, water, and a safe place to rest. John stayed with her, ensuring she was comfortable and that her injuries were tended to properly. Tay and Ida ate slowly, her strength returning bit by bit. John watched her, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. She had survived the plains, the dangers, and her injuries. Together they had faced the unknown, relying on courage, trust, and determination. The journey was far from over, but for now she was safe, and that was what mattered most. As night fell over the settlement, John sat outside looking at the stars. He reflected on the journey they had shared, the dangers, the struggles, and the moments of hope. He knew the coming days would bring new challenges, but he felt confident that Tay and Ida had the strength to face them. Together, they had endured, and together, they would continue to survive, step by step, until safety and healing were fully within their reach. The sun had barely risen over the hills when John Callahan stirred. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth, grass, and the faint aroma of smoke from the small farmhouse. Tay and Ida was awake, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, her dark eyes scanning the room as though weighing the day ahead. John helped her to her feet gently, mindful of her injured leg. Despite the pain, she stood tall, determined to keep moving. "We have to continue today," John said softly. "There's a safe place a few miles from here. We'll rest there and then you can start to heal properly." Tay and Ida nodded, her face set with quiet determination. She had survived so much already, and giving up was never an option. John admired her courage and resilience. They left the farmhouse after a simple breakfast of bread and fresh water provided by the kind couple. Tay and Ida limped slightly, but she walked with as much strength as she could summon. John supported her when needed, occasionally placing a steady hand on her back to help her balance over rough terrain. The plain stretched before them, open and golden under the morning sun, and the journey ahead was far from easy. As they walked, John noticed movement in the distance. A group of men on horseback appeared over a rise, riding quickly across the plains. His heart skipped a beat. He squatted behind a large rock and gestured for Tay and Ida to stay low. The men were dressed in dark coats, their faces hard to see from this distance. He could not tell if they were friendly settlers or a threat. Better to be safe than sorry. "Stay close and quiet," he whispered. Tay and Ida crouched beside him, her eyes wide but steady. John scanned the men carefully, noting their direction and pace. He realized they were moving toward the farmhouse, the same place they had just left. His mind raced. Had someone from the farmhouse warned them? Or were these men simply traveling across the plains? Either way, they needed to move carefully and avoid detection. Once the men passed, John exhaled slowly. "That was close," he said quietly. Tayanita pressed her hand against his arm, a silent gesture of thanks. The bond between them had grown stronger over the past days, built on trust, shared danger, and the need to survive together. He knew that without her courage, the journey would have been impossible, and without his protection, she would not have made it this far. They continued their trek, navigating a narrow canyon where the walls provided some shelter from the wind. Tayanita moved slowly but steadily, following John's instructions carefully. Every step was a test of endurance, yet she pushed herself forward with determination. John marveled at her strength. At such a young age, she had faced unimaginable loss and danger, yet she refused to give in. By midday, they reached a shallow river. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and John helped Tayanita step carefully into the cool current. The water eased the pain in her legs slightly, and she let out a small sigh of relief. They drank and refilled their canteens, knowing that every bit of water and energy would be crucial for the rest of the journey. As they continued, John scanned the horizon constantly. The plains were unpredictable and danger could appear at any moment. Every rustle in the grass, every distant sound made him tense. He reminded Tayanita to stay close, and she obeyed without question. Their trust in each other was complete, and it gave him confidence. They were no longer two strangers, they were a team, relying on each other for survival. In the afternoon, they reached a low ridge that offered a wide view of the land ahead. From this vantage point, John could see a column of smoke in the distance. He squinted, unsure if it was a friendly signal or a warning of danger. "We need to be careful," he said. "Let's move quietly and see what it is before we approach." Tayanita nodded, her dark eyes focused on the horizon. They moved cautiously across the plains, keeping low and using the natural cover of rocks and shrubs. As they approached the smoke, John could make out figures moving near the source, a small group of settlers, tending a fire and preparing food. Relief washed over him. This looked like a safe place, a spot where Tayanita could rest, recover, and finally find some protection. Carefully, John guided Tayanita to the edge of the settlement. He observed from a distance, ensuring that no one posed a threat. Once he was confident it was safe, he led her closer. The settlers noticed them and quickly came forward, offering food, water, and a place to rest. John explained their situation briefly, and the settlers listened with concern and compassion. Tayanita ate slowly, savoring the food and water, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax. John stayed beside her, ensuring that she was comfortable and that her injuries were treated properly. He could see the relief on her face, the weight of fear and pain slowly lifting. For now, they were safe. But John knew the plains held more challenges. He had seen enough to know that danger never truly disappeared. He would need to remain vigilant until Tayanita was fully out of harm's way. He stayed by her side, sharing stories of the land, the cattle, and the small town nearby. His calm voice reassured her, helping her regain some of the trust and confidence that the recent events had shaken. As night fell, John kept watch outside the settlement. The firelight flickered against the tents, casting shadows across the ground. He thought about the journey so far, the dangers they had faced, the moments of courage, and the trust that had grown between him and Tayanita. He knew that the coming days would bring new challenges, but he felt ready. Together, they had endured, and together, they would continue to survive. Tayanita slept fitfully inside, her small form curled under a blanket. Occasionally, she stirred, and John would check on her, ensuring that she remained comfortable. Her breathing became steady, and he allowed himself a small measure of relief. They had made it through another day, and tomorrow they would move closer to true safety. The next morning, John prepared for the continuation of their journey. Tayanita was awake, her dark eyes alert despite the lingering fatigue. He helped her stand and checked the splint on her leg. "We have to keep moving," he said. "There's a place ahead where you can be safe and start to recover." She nodded, determination clear in her expression. They left the settlement carefully, keeping to the shadows as they made their way across the plains. John guided her, helping her navigate rocky terrain and shallow streams. Each step was slow and deliberate, but Tayanita refused to give up. Her courage and resilience inspired John, and he found strength in her determination. By midday, they encountered a small hill with a natural shelter, a cave hidden behind a thicket of bushes. It would provide cover for rest and protection from the sun. John led Tayanita inside, making a small fire and preparing a spot where she could rest comfortably. The cave offered safety, and for the first time in days, they both allowed themselves a moment to relax. As they sat by the fire, John reflected on the journey. He thought about Tayanita's bravery, the dangers they had faced, and the bond that had formed between them. She had survived so much already, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility to ensure she reached safety. Her trust in him was profound, and he would not let her down. Night fell, and John kept his watch outside the cave. The plains were quiet, but he remained alert, knowing that danger could appear at any moment. Tayanita slept more soundly this night, comforted by the presence of someone who cared for her and would protect her. John felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, despite the hardships, they were surviving together. The next morning they prepared to continue their journey. John helped Tayanita to her feet and adjusted her splint once more. "We're getting closer," he said. "Just a little further and you'll be safe." She nodded, her face showing a mix of exhaustion and hope. Together they stepped out of the cave, ready to face the next part of the plains and whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. John Callahan helped Tayanita to her feet, adjusting her splint carefully. Her leg was sore, but she moved with determination. Each step forward was a victory, a reminder that she had survived so much already and that giving up was not an option. John watched her closely, proud of her courage and resilience. "We're almost there," he said gently. "Just a little further and you'll be safe." Tayanita nodded, her dark eyes full of trust. She had come a long way, enduring pain, fear, and uncertainty, but she had never lost hope. Her will to survive had carried them both through the plains, and now safety was within reach. They moved cautiously across the open fields, keeping low and using the natural cover of rocks and bushes. John scanned the horizon constantly, alert for any signs of danger. The plains could be unpredictable, and he knew that they could not afford to let their guard down. But with each step, the settlement in the distance grew closer, and a sense of relief began to settle over them. By midday, they reached the outskirts of a small town. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, and the sound of life, children playing, people talking, and animals moving, filled the air. John led Tayanita to the edge of town, careful to stay hidden until he could see that it was safe. He wanted to make sure no one would harm her before they were fully within the settlement. Finally, they stepped forward, and a few townspeople noticed them. John approached cautiously, explaining their situation briefly. The townspeople listened with concern and compassion, immediately offering food, water, and a safe place to rest. Tayanita's eyes widened as she took in the kindness around her. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of relief and hope. John helped her inside a small building where a kind healer lived. The healer examined Tayanita's injuries carefully, tending to her leg and cleaning her wounds properly. Tayanita flinched at the pain but remained calm, trusting John and the healer. He stayed by her side, holding her hand gently and offering quiet words of encouragement. "You've been through a lot," John said softly, "but you're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Tayanita looked up at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude and a flicker of hope. She had survived the plains, the dangers, and her injuries, and now, with help, she could begin to heal fully. The townspeople provided a simple meal, and Tayanita ate slowly, savoring every bite. John watched her carefully, ensuring she received the care she needed. The healer worked tirelessly, making sure her leg was properly supported and her wounds were cleaned and bandaged. Tayanita's strength was returning slowly, and with each passing hour, she grew more confident. As evening approached, John and Tayanita sat outside, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was calm, filled with the gentle sounds of the town settling for the night. John reflected on the journey they had shared, the dangers they had faced, the moments of fear and the courage Anita had shown. He realized how much they had both changed during this journey. Anita spoke softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Thank you," she said, "for helping me, for keeping me safe." John smiled faintly, his heart warmed by her words. "You did most of the work yourself," he replied. "Your courage brought us this far." She looked at him, a small smile spreading across her face, and for the first time in days she felt a sense of peace. The next few days were spent in the town, allowing Anita to recover fully. John stayed close, helping her with anything she needed and ensuring that she felt safe and supported. The townspeople were kind and welcoming, providing food, comfort, and a place to sleep. Slowly, the fear and exhaustion that had weighed on Anita began to lift. During this time, John and Anita shared stories. She spoke of her village, her family, and the life she had lost. John listened patiently, offering comfort and understanding. He shared stories of his own life on the plains, of the challenges he faced as a rancher and the lessons he had learned. Their bond deepened, built on trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. One afternoon, as they walked through the town, Anita paused to watch a group of children playing. She smiled softly, a rare moment of joy in her otherwise difficult life. John noticed her expression and felt a sense of pride. She had endured so much, yet she still had the capacity for hope and happiness. He knew that with time, she would rebuild her strength and find a place for herself in this new world. As the days passed, Anita's leg healed and her confidence grew. She began to explore the town, learning the rhythms of daily life and interacting with the people who had welcomed her. John continued to guide her, offering advice and support, but also giving her space to regain her independence. It was a delicate balance, but one that they managed with care and patience. One evening, as the sun set over the town, John and Anita sat quietly together. The journey they had shared was behind them, but its lessons remained. They had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, yet they had survived. They had discovered strength, courage, and the importance of trust and compassion. John looked at Anita, her dark eyes reflecting the fading light, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "You're stronger than you realize." Anita smiled faintly, her expression thoughtful. "I've had help," she replied. "From you?" John nodded, understanding the truth in her words. The journey had been difficult, but they had faced it together, and that made all the difference. As night fell, the town grew quiet, and John knew that Anita was finally safe. She could sleep without fear, recover without interruption, and begin to imagine a future beyond the dangers of the plains. For John, the journey had changed him as well. He had discovered the depth of human courage and the power of compassion. He had been reminded that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, acts of kindness and bravery could make all the difference. In the weeks that followed, Anita continued to recover. She learned to walk without support, her leg growing stronger each day. She shared her stories with the townspeople, and they welcomed her as one of their own. John continued to visit, ensuring that she had everything she needed. The bond they had formed during their journey remained strong, a testament to the challenges they had faced together. Eventually, Anita began to imagine a new life, one filled with hope and possibilities. The plains that had once seemed dangerous and unforgiving now represented a world of opportunity and growth. She could remember the hardships, but they no longer defined her. She had survived, she had grown stronger, and she had found safety and friendship in unexpected places. John watched her one afternoon as she played with the children of the town. Her laughter rang out across the fields, clear and joyful, a sound he would never forget. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had been part of her journey and that she had emerged from it stronger, wiser, and more resilient. As the sun set over the plains, John and Anita stood together, looking out at the horizon. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with fear and uncertainty, but it had also been filled with courage, trust, and hope. They had faced the unknown together and had emerged stronger on the other side. Anita turned to John and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." John smiled back, a warm, quiet smile. "You did it yourself," he replied. "Your courage brought you here." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. She had survived, not just because of help, but because of her own determination and strength. The plains stretched before them, calm and peaceful in the fading light. The journey was over, but its lessons remained. Courage, trust, and compassion had carried them through the darkest moments, and now they could look forward to a future filled with hope and possibility. John and Anita walked back to the town together, side by side. The world was wide, the plains open, and the future uncertain, but they had survived. They had faced danger, fear, and loss, and they had emerged stronger for it. And as the stars began to shine overhead, they both knew that no matter what came next, they had the courage and strength to face it together. The story of their journey would remain in their hearts forever, a story of survival, trust, and the power of human courage. Anita had endured unimaginable hardship, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and full of hope. And John, the rancher who had guided her through the plains, had discovered the true depth of human compassion and bravery. Together they had faced the unknown, and together they had survived. The plains were calm now, the journey behind them, but the lessons they had learned would remain forever. Courage, trust, and determination had carried them through, and they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they could face them with strength, hope, and the knowledge that they were never truly alone.